I'm going to wait just a couple minutes. We had about over 40 people signed up. I have to tell you that at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, which was about 30 minutes ago, I lost all electricity at my house, and I was going to give this presentation using my desktop computer, which obviously we couldn't. So well, Tim, there's always a better way. I appreciate your Jose, you can't hear me, but everybody else can. I'm wondering, Jose, if you just need to... No, they can't hear me. So again, I apologize. I had to put this together in the last 30 minutes. It's a new platform, meaning I've given webinars before. Jose still can't hear me. Tim, you can hear me though, correct? If you go up to the top of your screen and click on that gear, it may help you select your inputs and outputs. Take your time. Hey, Brian, how are you? Thanks for joining. And as Chrissy would like to remind me that you can set the volume and camera using the gear in the upper right of your screen. Hey, Laura, how are you? Hey, Chris from Texas, how are you? I believe you are the Dallas Cowboys fan. Hey, Patrick from Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robert, you're welcome. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes. It's 8:05. What I was going to do before the electricity went out is I was just going to make 3 or 4 statements about pretty much the most common questions I get, kind of to give you all some energy. I was going to show a recent vitrectomy, and as I said, then at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, all the electricity in my neighborhood, for unexplainable reasons, we're not having any weather, it simply went out. And so I drove over to a neighboring neighbor who does have electricity, and I set everything up in her office. So any plaques in the background have nothing to do with me. They're much smarter in this house than I am. Hey, Laura. Okay, well, why don't we get started? I'm Randy Wong. Welcome to my webinar for the treatment of floaters, or FOV. And today's episode is a little bit special because we're going to have a live Q&A, which is kind of what we've had in other times, but that was after a rather lengthy presentation. As I get more popular, I have to be more careful. So bear with me. This webinar is for informational purposes only. This webinar is not offering medical advice, and nothing should be construed as such. You should not act or rely, spelling error, on anything in this webinar. This webinar is not a substitute for medical advice from a licensed professional. The content of this webinar may become quickly outdated, especially due to the nature of the topics covered, which are constantly evolving. The materials and information in this webinar are not guaranteed to be correct, complete, or timely. Nothing between this webinar and you creates a doctor-patient relationship. Even if you contact me through this posting or through the webinar, it does not create a doctor-patient relationship. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor unless there's a written agreement specifically providing for a doctor-patient relationship. Sorry for the legal mumbo-jumbo, but it's modern times. One of the most common questions I get are concerns about floaters located in the so-called premacular bursa. And the premacular bursa is the area right in front of the macula. So let me just start out by saying that the premacular bursa is a YAG laser concern only, meaning that if you're going to consider using a YAG laser to break up floaters, you really have to be careful about the proximity of the floaters to the surface of the retina or the macula, because if it's too close, theoretically, the YAG laser could damage your macula and thereby damage your vision. This is not a concern with vitrectomy or FOV, because you're simply pulling away or removing the vitreous, which is located near the macula. But the vitrectomy is certainly able to remove floaters regardless of how close they are to the premacular bursa. Number 2, the fancy term for floaters only vitrectomy is vitrectomy. So when I talk to other doctors, I talk in terms of vitrectomy. I think FOV is basically a layman's term for vitrectomy. There is not, I want to stress that FOV is not a special procedure. It's the same procedure that I perform or any retina specialist performs for any other retinal surgical condition. So FOV is vitrectomy. It's just that it's, for our relevance and for our argument's sake, FOV has become a term that we all use for people that suffer from floaters, like you guys. After the vitreous is removed, what replaces the vitreous? Well, the vitreous is about 94% water. So if we remove the vitreous, and my analogy is that the vitreous is very much like jellyfish, mostly water, but it does have some substance. That's why you can pick up jellyfish out of the water with a net and remove them and throw them on the sand. So the vitreous is mostly water, but it does have some substance. It does have protein. Once we remove the vitreous, it's replaced by artificial saline. So a 94% water material gets replaced by 100% water, artificial saline. And that artificial saline gets turned over or replaced by your own aqueous humor or your own saline within about 24 to 48 hours. The last thing that I wanted to point out, and I was unable to do this by 8 o'clock tonight, is that in the last week I have added a forum section to the website vitrectomyforfloaters.com. We haven't had any use yet, but it is what I was trying to hope, or what I've tried to create is my own forum, which allows me to monitor your questions and comments without invading other forums and other places. I felt very strongly over the years that I should stay away from other forums or other bulletin boards. So I'm hoping that by creating my own, number one, I can monitor it. Number two, you can see how I ask, or excuse me, how I'm asked questions and how I answer them, all on my website. And I think it'll provide for a little bit more cohesive transfer of information. I was at this point going to show you a vitrectomy that I performed about 2 weeks ago. But again, for those that are chiming in late, I lost electricity in my house about 45 minutes ago, and I had to kind of make do. And as they say, the show must go on. So I'm at a neighbor's house who does have electricity, and I'm using her computer and her PowerPoint, et cetera, et cetera. What I would like to do at this point is let's open up the webinar to questions, and let's move forward. So I think the best way to do is just go ahead and type questions into me, and I will read them and answer them. And we will do this for the next 40, 45 minutes, if that's okay. If you have questions or concerns, just type them in the chat box. I can read them, and we can get going. Number one, Mitch. I have lived with floaters for over 21 years. They have slowly gotten worse over the years. I'm 36 years old and have perfectly healthy eyes other than the floaters. What is the likelihood that new floaters will form following a successful vitrectomy? Well, the likelihood, let's assume that the floaters are not due to disease or blood. Then I would say that it is highly unlikely that floaters would recur after you have a successful vitrectomy. Most of the floaters that I deal with are floaters that have not absorbed or gone away, and they remain persistent. So if that's your case, then it's highly, highly likely that a vitrectomy would be effective, and it's unlikely that they would recur. If they were to recur, I would say that it would be due to either a tear in your retina. If for some reason you had a disease which could lead to bleeding, that could give you recurrent floaters. Or if you have a disease called uveitis or inflammation in your eye, that could cause recurrent floaters as well. Good question, though. Anybody else? Oh, here we go. Robert says, have you performed an FOV on individuals such as pilots or law enforcement officers where vision is critical to their career? The answer is yes. I have several of each, all of whom are still actively and successfully performing their duties. I believe I have 3 airline pilots, commercial airline pilots, and 3 armed, law enforcement officials. Alexander says, Doctor, I want to ask about lattice. It is my understanding that if I'm doing a vitrectomy, we can do laser to strengthen. So I want to ask, will you still do PVD-induced vitrectomy on someone like me with lattice? First of all, understand, this is a very common concern, Alexander. Lattice is very common. It's a common condition, often explained as to thinning of the retina, but it's present in about 7 to 10% of the population. At times, if the lattice degeneration has become thin enough so that there are holes in the retina, we can laser around the area of thinning or lattice degeneration so that you can't get a retinal detachment. I personally do not think that lattice degeneration is a contraindication to inducing a PVD. All cases are different. This is a generalization, but I think it's something that we could talk about, but I don't think there's any reason why you would think that you couldn't get a vitrectomy with an induced PVD because you've got lattice degeneration. Tim, I'm 34, -6 in the left eye and -7 in the right eye. Until about 12 months ago, I popped in my contacts and was happy. Until about 12 months ago, I popped in my contacts and I was happy, successful and carefree. Does being this myopic increase my chances of complications? And what are they? Increased retinal detachment, glaucoma, etc. I don't consider -6 or -7 severely myopic or highly nearsighted. I think someone that is a -20 has different concerns and a different life than you do. I think I would consider, although the textbooks say that you technically have quote-unquote high myopia, I don't feel that you're in any danger. I don't feel that you're at any risk for suffering any higher complications than anybody else that would have an operation. I do not think that glaucoma is a consideration for anybody or a possible complication for anybody who undergoes a vitrectomy or FOV. Because you are nearsighted, I think technically you might be at a slighter risk for retinal detachment or chance of getting a retinal tear, and I would say it's somewhere between 2 or 3%. I hope that answers your question. Jose asks, if there's a cataract after FOV, to correct it, is it more difficult in an eye with vitrectomy? You know, my friends that do lots of cataract surgery says that they can tell if an eye has had a vitrectomy, but they don't feel it is necessarily more difficult. And I think the answer is that if and when you were to develop a cataract and you've had a vitrectomy, that you want to seek the skills of a cataract surgeon who is used to working with a retina specialist. And there's lots of them everywhere. So the answer is yes, maybe yes, but to a very, very tiny degree. Allison asks, does vitrectomy increase the risk of glaucoma and macular degeneration? The answer is not that we know of. And I'd be hard pressed to figure out how that would occur. Definitely not macular degeneration. Laura wants to know, does vision always return to normal after the vitrectomy? Always is kind of like a guarantee. I would say you can expect it to return to normal, and that in most cases, vision is actually better than before the vitrectomy because the floaters are gone. Alexander says, thank you. And Alexander, you're very welcome. I want to thank you for joining. Are you actually attending from Sweden? Or is Sweden your last name? Mitch asks, how long before I will be able to see good enough to return to my job? I'm in law enforcement, but in an office environment 95% of the time. In most cases, I operate on a Friday. I will see you the next morning, Saturday. The patch will come off and it stays off, and we start some drops. In most cases, I encourage full return to physical activity by Sunday, so 24 to 48 hours after your operation. Now, there's lots of things that need to be considered, you know, your age and if there were any other eye concerns, but in most cases, everyone's able to return to full activity in about 24 to 48 hours. Vision usually improves continuously for the first 3, 5, 7 days. But if you're in the office, I don't see any reason why you couldn't go back and do office work. But I don't obviously know all the requirements of your job, but that gives you an idea of how flexible and how active you'll be right after the surgery. Allison asks, can you get LASIK after vitrectomy? And the answer is absolutely. In fact, we have several patients who will get the laser vision correction done after vitrectomy. Chris asks, in one of the earlier webinars, you did not want to induce a PVD. What made you change to wanting to induce a PVD? The answer to that is that I've decided, or I've found that inducing a PVD allows me to more efficiently remove more vitreous than if I don't create a PVD. And what I found in younger individuals, and let's just generically say less than 30, who have had long-standing floaters, this is the group that tends to get what we call frill, which is the remaining vitreous along the side. So if I create a PVD, I can remove more of that vitreous, and there is less chance of patients developing frill. So the reason I've changed my mind is that in the younger patients that have floaters and then notice frill, to them the frill is just as bad as having the floaters. And what I'm trying to kind of get patients to understand is that vitrectomy to remove floaters, the goal of vitrectomy is to significantly reduce the floaters that are bothering you. If you start to notice something else such as frill, you can't consider that as a complication or failure. And that's a big distinction that I want patients to understand, is that the goal of surgery is to reduce floaters. If we can do that, then I think we were successful. If something else develops, then well, we have to attack that. Now, frill, in my opinion, is something you notice after vitrectomy, but it's certainly not a complication and certainly not not the end of the world. Tim says, thank you, Mr. Wong. Yes, it was. Yes, it did, and was good news since I read it. It was severe if I was over 6 diopters. I'm glad things worked out, and you're not as abnormal as maybe you were led to believe. Alexander says, Doctor, what are the long-term risks after vitrectomy? Is glaucoma a risk? We don't really know. There are no studies of long-term effects of anyone that's had a vitrectomy, because a vitrectomy is done for so many reasons. So that as far as we know, vitrectomy is safe. Vitrectomy was invented somewhere around 1980, 1985. So since then, we don't know of any long-standing risks to having a vitrectomy. Glaucoma can develop with or without vitrectomy. So glaucoma is kind of an independent variable and can occur whether or not you have vitrectomy surgery or not. And Alexander says, I'm living in Melbourne right now. Smiley face. My wife is next to me too. Wasi. She has really bad floaters. Well, I hope this webinar provides enough information so you have a better understanding of what's available and what options there are. Chrissy McGargy is attending tonight. She is my my assistant, and she takes care of all my online communications. So if you email us and you want to schedule an appointment, or you have questions about logistics, where to fly, so on and so forth, how to schedule an appointment, it's Chrissy that you communicate with. And she wants to remind me that you can fly in addition to having full physical activity within 24 to 48 hours, as long as you can get on an airplane as well. That's a really, really good common question. And Chrissy, thanks for reminding me to mention that. Jose said complications like a retinal tear are about 2 to 3%, but I read in the internet that it's about 15% and induced PVD more than 15%. Is that true? All I can say, Jose, is not in my experience. Otherwise, I would have said, the chance of getting a tear is 15%. I don't know where that came from, but I think the truth of the matter is national statistics are closer to about 1 to 2%. These are not Randy Wong only statistics. Chance of getting a tear after cataract surgery is about 1 to 2%, and I think it's the same for vitrectomy. I think at least in theory, if you're inducing a PVD because you're pulling on the vitreous, it's more likely that you're going to get a tear. And I'm guessing somewhere between a chance of 2 to 4%, perhaps. Eric says, generally speaking, after FOV, is there a window of time, for instance, number of weeks, during which risk of RD is increased? Or put another way, post-FOV, is there an increased risk of RD, and typically when does that risk return to baseline? That's a really good question. I think that there is so much surgeon variability that we don't really know the answer. I know that my personal experience after about 23, 24 years is that it's unlikely to get a retinal detachment 3, 4, 6 weeks after vitrectomy, but it does happen. I have patients that get a retinal detachment 1 to 2 years later after I operated on them, and it's always hard to know, and we'll never know. Is it because of the initial operation? Probably not, because it should cause a retinal detachment, in a matter of weeks. Or did it happen unrelated to the vitrectomy? So to answer your questions, I think within the first 4 to 6 weeks is the most likely time you would see the complication of retinal detachment. Laura asks, have you ever had a patient experience foreign body sensation or dry eyes after vitrectomy? Do you mean immediately after? I think for the first couple of weeks, it's very common to have a foreign body sensation, especially if I use sutures to close the conjunctiva, because you can actually possibly feel them. I have not had anyone that I'm aware of that have had persistent dry eyes is usually not a complaint shortly after or shortly after or many weeks following vitrectomy. So the answer to dry eyes is no, I don't have that as a concern. Allison says, you don't need to qualify your questions. I know you're going to find this question kind of crazy, but what would you say if a patient came in with frill and just wanted to get rid of all of the vitreous and get new lenses while they were at it because they are just sick of dealing with the vitreous after surgery to reduce the frill failed? Let's have you ask me that question again. I'd like to know what you mean by lenses. Do you mean lenses in your glasses or lenses as in getting early cataracts removed and having implants put in? I do operate, and I have operated on patients with frill. And again, in my opinion, frill is the residual vitreous left off to the side, and we just have to remove more of the vitreous. I would not be too supportive of taking out your lenses just so that we could remove more vitreous. The natural lens does prevent removing some of the vitreous towards the front. Usually is not an issue. Maybe that's what you're asking. I don't know. Jose, why is vitrectomy for floaters feared by most doctors? This is another common question. At the time when vitrectomy was invented, and this is my opinion, well, let me first say that there are probably 30 to 40% of eye doctors are still were in practice when vitrectomy was invented or became useful. When vitrectomy first came to be used for retina surgery in the mid-1980s, it was used on some of the sickest eyes, patients with really severe diabetic retinopathy who, even if they had vitrectomy, still went blind from the disease. So I think to a lot of non-retina specialists, that kind of gave vitrectomy a bad name. I think at modern times with 25 and 27 and 23 gauge vitrectomies are used for so many different things than when it was first introduced in the mid-1980s. But there are so many doctors that are still in practice that are non-retina specialists that don't understand really what vitrectomy was, what was going on with the initial patients. And that was, they were basically the sickest eyes in ophthalmology. And we were trying to use this new procedure called vitrectomy, and they still went blind. Remember, a whole new generation of doctors had to learn how to use vitrectomy and how to use these techniques. Now, what we have with modern vitrectomy in 2016 is you have a whole slew of doctors, perhaps, a whole generation of doctors, which grew up and trained primarily on vitrectomy, and they didn't have to learn it as an older physician. So I think one of the reasons that vitrectomy is just kind of feared is that there's a lot of people that remember in the old days that people did go blind after vitrectomy. What they didn't realize is they went blind after vitrectomy from the disease, not the operation. In 2016, with a smaller gauge, I think that the complication rate or the theoretic complications drop really low because of these smaller instruments. The biggest would be creation of retinal tears. Patrick asks, what does frill look like to the patient? I've heard it described as wavy patterns or wavy lines far off to the periphery. They don't really float like floaters, but they do kind of shimmer and kind of wiggle. It does not block your vision, but I think patients with frill are able to see where the edge or the boundary where the vitreous was removed versus some of the vitreous which remains. So there's a line of contrast there. Alexander, yes, doctor, we want to visit you next year, hopefully in the summer. I look forward to seeing you. Hope you can make it. It would be nice just to meet you. Tim says, since floaters, my night vision has gotten worse, or has got worse. I can see starburst and glare, ghosting vision on my car speed dial numbers. I do not have cataracts confirmed by 2 docs. In your experience, have your patients mentioned similar issues, and will FOV likely make that better too? I can see floaters at night in car headlights like bacteria, but in day they are cobwebs. Have you come across floaters affecting night vision this way? The answer is yes. Floaters I've seen, which are so bad they cause a lot of glare. And I think that if I were to examine you, I would be able to tell fairly quickly whether or not this was the problem. What you're describing is that you've got floaters that are dense enough to give you the halos and the glare, and it makes perfect sense. The reason you can, my guess is the reason that you can see the bacteria during night against car headlights is that you're just changing the reflection pattern of the light that's going in your eye and affecting the floaters. So you're not crazy. It makes perfect sense. Alexander says, Doctor, we've read in so many places. No, wait. Sorry, lost my place. Doctor, we've read in so many forums, people complain about debris after surgery. Some people take longer, it seems. Do they always go away with time? You know, I can't answer for patients that I don't know. It is not uncommon to have floaters for a couple days afterwards, but there's all kinds of variability in patients and in surgeons. I would just say that it's not usual to have long-standing or permanent floaters after vitrectomy in my patients. Mitch, where do I see floater treatment in 5 to 10 years? Quite frankly, I think there's going to be a lot more doctors willing to do it. I don't think technology is going to change or become that much better. Going from 25 gauge, going from 20 gauge, a thicker, bigger instrument, to 25 gauge was a huge game changer. I think 23 has some place, and 27, I'm not so sure if that's really going to be as impactful as going from 20 to 25. Allison comments that she's had 2 vitrectomies. One was PVD induced and one was not. What are the chances in having a natural PVD later in the core vitrectomy eye and having a huge floater bother me? Well, everybody gets a PVD, so the chances of you getting a PVD later in life are pretty much 100%. What are the chances of having a huge floater bothering you? I don't know. I've not met you. I don't know the severity of the floaters you had before. Let me say that most people, if I tell you that a PVD is a natural event and that it happens to everybody, most people do not get significant floaters. So I think that it could happen, but it may also likely not happen. Eric, thank you, you said. And Eric, to you, I say you're welcome. Thanks for attending. Laura said, I think this was in follow-up to the dry eye and foreign body sensation. Yes, a couple of weeks later, no sutures. Then all I can say is, maybe environmental changes were drier or there was dustier, but there is nothing inherent about having a vitrectomy that I'm aware of leading to a chronic dry eye situation. It is possible that perhaps, because you were so aware of all your eye symptoms because you just had an operation, that you were just more aware of the foreign body sensation. It's just a guess. Yen asks, if a retinal detachment does happen during or after surgery, does it usually occur in the peripheral of the vision, or does it just as often happen in or near central vision? Retinal detachments rarely occur during surgery. They can, but not for floaters, or it shouldn't occur during floaters only vitrectomy. Hope I just didn't jinx myself. All naturally occurring retinal detachments occur in the peripheral vision because that's the only place where tears occur, in the anterior or peripheral retina. That is the only place where the vitreous is very, very sticky or adherent to the retina. So all the tears happen in the front half or portion of the retina. I've never seen a tear through the macula, which gives you central vision. Mark says he's legally blind in his right eye due to trauma, and he suffers from severe floaters in the left eye that constantly blur and darken my vision. Floaters have impacted every aspect of my daily life, and I'm currently struggling with the idea of getting an FOV because of fear of going completely blind. Do you think an FOV in my situation would be too risky? Thank you. Eye surgeons, every eye surgeon, eventually has to deal with operating on a patient with either one eye or one useful eye. There's never a good or there's not one right answer. And it depends on your situations. It depends on what your expectations are and your ability to understand the risks. I think that if you understand the risks, then I think it's something to consider. The risks that I fear for my patients are blindness from infection. I think the chance of that is somewhere between 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 15,000. We talked about the risk of retinal detachment. And then I don't consider cataract formation a complication, but my blanket statement for cataract formation is that in my experience, cataracts can happen, but they usually do not. But if you were to develop a cataract, or a cataract did increase or develop rapidly after surgery, cataract surgery is the most common surgery in the world. It's become highly, highly successful, but not without risks. Chris asks, when did you start wanting to help people with eye floaters with an FOV when most other doctors are not willing to do it unless there are other complications? That's a really good question, and it really comes down to the fact that I've done so many vitrectomies, and I've got enough confidence that I can write about it and talk about my experience. And when I talk about complications, when I talk about statistics, I'm not talking about my own complications or my statistics. I'm talking about national complications and national rates of those complications. I think that if I were younger in my career, I don't think I would have the confidence to go online and to do webinars and to document everything that I've said. But I've done a lot of surgery. I have a lot of experience in this area, so that I think in the last 5 to 10 years, I realized, especially after technology has improved, that vitrectomy really is getting a bad rap in terms of helping people. So voila, here we are. Okay, I lost my place. Allison, implants are put in. Yeah, I think, Allison, that it might be more reasonable to consider either clear lens extraction or get your cataracts removed, then come to me, or then consider a vitrectomy after having implants put in. Because if you're really concerned about frill, you can probably do a better job without the natural lens in the way. Alexander asks, I want to ask about the laser, if it's okay. Yes, it's okay. Can laser leave a scar if it's to repair a tear? There are two different lasers. We're talking about two different lasers. The YAG laser is not used to repair a retinal tear. An argon laser or a dye laser is used to repair a tear, whereas the YAG laser does not generate heat, but its energy is used to cut. So it is used to, in this case, blast or obliterate the larger floaters. Laura said, I had a vitrectomy approximately 3 weeks ago and I'm experiencing some discomfort, again with no sutures. Drops were stopped after a week, and is this discomfort normal? You know, Laura, I should probably encourage you to let your doctor know. It can be normal, it can be abnormal. You just stop medications and then you develop a new symptom. So I would say that you should make sure tomorrow, give your doctor a call and let him or her know that you're having these new symptoms. I generally keep drops for about the same time. Sometimes people need drops longer, sometimes they don't. I wish I could, without my ability to examine you, I really can't say anything more than a generalization, which I know is frustrating and not really helpful to you. And for that, I'm sorry. Allison says, asking for a friend who couldn't attend. What is the percentage of cataracts after vitrectomy and how long after? Why do some doctors use sutures and some don't? What are the advantages and disadvantages of sutures? Wow. We're going to do another. First of all, Chrissy and I are committed to doing. We're going to try and do monthly webinars. So we're going to do another one in January. We haven't set the date. Watch the website. If you subscribe to the website, we'll announce it through the email newsletter or monitor the Facebook page. Let's see. Percentage of cataracts after vitrectomy and how long after. I'm going to say that in my experience, most of my patients don't need cataract surgery after vitrectomy. I've got patients out there, and I think someone from Texas could maybe attest to this, because I think he and I met 2 to 3 years ago, and I'm not aware that he developed any cataracts. I know that I've had patients. Occasionally you get older patients or some patients that do need cataract surgery, but I would say without a doubt most do not. If they do, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. Remember, cataracts are a natural event. It happens to everybody. So in that regard, it's a little tough to answer. But in the short run, it can happen, but it usually does not. Why do some doctors use sutures and some don't? Well, what I think you're asking is, why do some doctors use sutures despite using a smaller gauge, or like 25, and some don't? I use 25 gauge almost exclusively, and I prefer to put in sutures in my out-of-town patients, because then I don't have to worry about sometimes the pressure is low the next day, or sometimes there's retrograde bleeding, meaning bleeding from the outside into the eye because the pressure's low. The last thing I want to do is see you on a weekend and you're about to leave town and something unexpected happens. So I prefer, with my out-of-town patients, I prefer to use sutures. I don't know why others do or don't. I don't think there's any disadvantage of sutures other than the foreign body sensation that you may feel for a couple of days. Even though they dissolve, they will remain in your eye probably for about 4 to 6 weeks. I don't think there's any real disadvantage of using them, other than the fact that the little bit of redness that is caused and the foreign body sensation, but I don't think there's any long-term disadvantage. Alexander says, you've been following me for a while. We can't wait. Thanks so much. That's a very nice sentiment. That's too bad. Doctors have told you have a mental issue. I don't believe you do. I think it makes absolutely every bit of sense to me. And I'm sorry doctors have the audacity to say that to you. Now, having said that, I've never met you. You may have a mental issue, but from what you described, it sounds like it could be glare from your vitreous. I'm going to turn this next question over to Chrissy. It says, what is your experience with insurance companies? Chrissy, could I possibly turn your... Everyone stay there. Chrissy, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me? Got a no. Can you not?
Wait, I can hear you now. I think everyone can hear you.
Hello, everyone.
So
Not
the
the
question is, sorry, you're probably yelling at your teenager. Uh, so
insurance, right?
hold on one second. I just lost my place. Okay, Patrick said, Doctor, what's your experience with insurance companies? Chrissy, what's your experience with insurance?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I just had posted something. Make sure to bring up insurance, and I'll just read you what I said is, please mention that FOV is actually covered by medical insurance a majority of the time. Larger PPO plans like Blue Cross, Aetna, United Healthcare. And when I say larger, I'm meaning like not one of these off the wall kind of insurance companies that not many people have. I can't speak for those, but for the larger PPO plans, mostly they cover it because they consider floaters to be the diagnosis. And how do you treat the floaters? Vitrectomy. So they consider it medically necessary and therefore covered. Now, every policy is different. So of course, I can't make guarantees either that they are going to cover it. Definitely email me and I can do a couple things to help and kind of look into it for you. But one thing, I cannot do is call your insurance for you. I can give you the codes so that you can call up and say, hey, here's the CPT code. What's my expected out of pocket? Because if I call, technically you're not our patient yet, so they won't talk to me. So it's a whole privacy, thing. So, definitely email me. I've been doing this a long time. Even before I started working with Randy, that's what I did was insurance. So I can definitely, help out. So as long as and HMO plans, they will not cover it. So if you have an HMO plan, they're very strict about what doctors you can see, etc. So as long as it's a PPO and it's a larger one, you shouldn't have a problem getting it covered.
I would say that, if you in doubt, just call your insurance company.
Yeah.
Chrissy can give you the diagnosis and the CPT codes. There are so many insurance companies and they all have different rules and regs. Just if this is something that, excuse me, interests you, just go ahead and call them. I'm going to move on.
Get the code. Raina, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but definitely get the code from me first, because if you call the insurance company, some of them may come back and think that this is somehow cosmetic or it's elective. And don't do that, because then you're going to kind of start it off in a different direction. I will give you a specific code for vitrectomy, and that way there's no question. We're not asking, is it medically necessary? It is. What's my out of pocket to be expected? So, and my email is everywhere. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me and has further questions, don't hesitate. Just shoot me an email.
Thanks, Chrissy.
No problem.
I'm going to turn you off so you yell at you know who.
Oh, yes.
Now, how did I? Okay, Jose wants to know, is it better to use sutures in an FOV to avoid ocular hypotony? It's possible with a 25 gauge, 23 or 27, where sutures are not usually used. It's possible to have your eye soft or hypotenuse the next day, but this usually is not a persistent condition, or at least I've never really seen it. I would say if you don't even want to risk that, we can use sutures. And that's why I like to do it in patients that are about to leave town, because I think it's just better peace of mind. And as I answered the other question, there's really no disadvantage to sutures other than the foreign body sensation. Tim, do you laser 360 the retina to migrate, prevent the risk of retinal detachment? No, I don't. I'm confused, as a few eye surgeons seem to believe this technique and others don't. I will inspect your retina to see if there's any tears. Any tears that I see, or anything that looks like a suspicious tear, I will laser. But I do not routinely laser, especially 360 degrees. Lou says, I have a rippling. I I'm kind of reading faster because we have about 5 or 8 minutes left. I have this rippling or shimmering sensation after the vitrectomy for floaters and macular pucker about 4 months ago. What is the possible cause and would it go away? I think you emailed me this, and my answer was that it's possible that the rippling could be from the removal of the macular pucker because it kind of irritates or stimulates the retina. Now, I've never seen you on it. I don't know how you were before the operation. That's just a possibility. It is also a possibility that you are that your remaining vitreous is causing some changes in your vision. Robert, is it uncommon to have eye pressure issues after FOV? No, it is not. No, wait. Is it uncommon to have eye pressure issues after FOV? Yes, it's uncommon. Sorry about that. Generally speaking, how soon after the operation does the pressure return to normal? Generally speaking, it's normal the next day and never abnormal. Alexander, doctor, I want to ask about cataract. I'm 35 and I get the surgery done now. When can cataract form in me, in your opinion? I heard it depends on your age. I'm not so sure the vitrectomy is going to influence the cataract formation. With or without vitrectomy, it is not uncommon for a 30-year-old to need cataract surgery. So the real question is, what and we don't know this, what is your natural propensity to have cataract and whether or not it's influenced by surgery? I think that at 35, you don't necessarily have to think that you're going to get a cataract any sooner. Although I admit there seems to be there's a lot of information that say otherwise. Alexander wants to know how many have I done. I can just, vitrectomies for all reasons, tens of thousands. Eric, further to Allison's question, if bothersome floaters develop subsequent to a core vitrectomy due to a natural PVD or other reasons, is a second FOV on the same eye still reasonable, albeit somewhat increased risk profile? Complicated question in some ways. If you've had a PVD, you're not really getting a core vitrectomy. The easiest situation or the best situation to remove the most vitreous is in an eye with a PVD. If it's a natural PVD, then there's really no such thing as a core. Core to me means that you're removing just the central vitreous and you're leaving all the vitreous that is close to or adherent to the retina. Regardless, is a second FOV on the same eye still reasonable? And the answer is yes, as long as you and I understand what our goals are. I don't feel that in some ways, because you have to be a little bit more aggressive, then perhaps complications complications might be increased. I think the biggest risk or biggest complication when you're doing repeat vitrectomies is there's a higher chance that your instruments may actually touch your natural lens, and if that happens, it's easier to get a cataract. But I don't think there's any increased risk in retinal tears, etc. Okay, I'm going to read just a couple more, then I'm going to say goodnight and wish you all a happy holidays. Jose, how do you see vitrectomy in 10 years in the future? Maybe the posterior part of the eye can be seen in 3D to have a better perspective of the inside of the eye. When I operate, I'm using both eyes, and I do have great depth perception. It's so good that in other surgeries, we're able to remove membranes off the surface of the retina using these tiny, tiny forceps. I may have misinterpreted your question. If I did, I apologize. Mitch says, I really appreciate the attention you give to the condition of floaters. I will be setting up an appointment with Christy in the next few weeks. I look forward to meeting you and your staff. Mitch, I look forward to meeting you. Thank you very much for attending. Have a great holiday. Alexander, doctor says, from your experience over the time, have you had any cases with infection? I've had one case in 24 years of all my patients, and that patient might have had an infection. I do know that he was chronically infected before the surgery, but he had severe diabetes, and that is probably responsible to the infection. Lou says, after my vitrectomy surgery, my eye was sensitive under certain indoor light conditions. What is the possible reason? I think the most obvious reason is you just had surgery, which was irritating your eye. Anything that irritates your eye, you're usually light sensitive. Chris said, I had the YAG laser done in both eyes for floaters without any success. I was floater free for about a month, but they just came back. What's your opinion about the late YAG? Well, until recently, I only knew 3 people that did the YAG laser, which should tell you how popular it is. It's not covered by insurance, and at least as far as I know, and I don't believe I'm aware of any retina people that do the YAG laser, and I don't do it. The reason we don't do it is that the YAG laser imparts a lot of energy to cut the tissue, and that energy could pull on the retina and cause a tear. Plus, it doesn't. Not every patient. It doesn't work for every patient. Let me just end by saying there are lots of procedures for all kinds of different diseases. There is no one procedure that is best for everyone. So I'm not saying that all YAGs are bad. I think there are people in whom it works. But that's my opinion about laser. Laura, do you ever have a hard spot where the incision has been made? No, you shouldn't. And I'm assuming you must have a hard spot on your eye where the incision's been made. Alexander, you're welcome. Alexander thanks me. Have a great holiday. Hopefully to see you next summer. Chris says, I want to thank you for these webinars that you've given and the fast returns on the emails. I'm planning to come see you sometime in the next few months. During the first visit, can you tell what is causing the issue during the eye exam? Yes. Can you see if a PVD has happened? Almost always. Tim Lawrenson, I appreciate your time, Mr. Wong. I'm saving up, but we'll do FOV sometime in 2017. Thank you for your help. You're welcome. Alexander, happy holidays to you too. Thanks. Greetings from Melbourne. Everyone, thank you very, very much for attending. I think this is a really worthwhile experience for everyone. I think there's a lot of value for you to hear my voice, see how I answer questions, even to see what I look like. Hopefully, I'll be able to meet you in person if you think that's the best thing for you. Chris and I will be doing this again in about a month, so we're trying to make this more regular so that more people can interact and get something from this. And again, if you have a chance, go to the www.vitrectomyforfloaters.com. That's my website. And check out the forum section. I think there's a lot of value, just as you heard here, that if people can share their questions in the open and then see how I respond, I think more people can get even more information. So, even if it's just for an experiment, go to the forum, maybe ask the same question you did tonight, and I'll do my best to respond. Chrissy, thanks for attending. Everybody else, thank you very much for attending. If you'd like to come back next month, that would be really great. Until then, happy holidays and happy New Year. Thanks so much.